Good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the weekly political agenda. Tonight we will discuss Egypt's presidential elections. More than 265,000 expats have voted in the presidential elections at embassies around the world, Egypt's foreign ministry announced on Sunday. The preliminary number was counted from Thursday up until Sunday at 5:30 p.m. A spokesman said, adding that the turnout so far is almost double that of January's constitutional referendum. Monday was the third and last day for the expats voting, as voting inside Egypt will take place on the 26th and 27th of May. Meanwhile, presidential front runner Abdel al-Sisi expects Egypt's situation will improve in 2 years if things go according to plan. He said in a televised interview. Sisi, who is backed by a wave of Egyptians who lauded the former army chief for ousting President Mohamed Morsi in July last year, also said he would not hesitate to resign if there were mass protests against him. The country has been rocked by more than 3 years of political turmoil that toppled the two presidents after massive street protests. A deadly crackdown on protesters that has killed more than 1,400 people, and a spate of militant attacks that has left the country deeply polarized and the economy in shambles. In his first televised interview as presidential candidate, Sisi also said that Muslim Brotherhood, the group he removed from power last year, will not exist if he is elected as president. Both candidates, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Hamdeen Sabahi, continue their campaigning, in which each candidate is trying to prove that he is the right man for the post as the president of Egypt. Let's take a look at this report and we'll come back for further discussions.
Egyptians elect a president on the 26th and 27th of May 2014. This is the second president Egyptians vote for in 2 years. Two presidential candidates are currently running their presidential campaigning, Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Hamdeen Sabahi. Egyptian expat votes ended Monday with the highest turnout in history at over 300,000 voters in 124 countries worldwide. Preliminary results indicate that General al-Sisi is leading the results of the elections so far. The campaign of the presidential candidate al-Sisi has received support from several parties that organized rallies for al-Sisi in the governorates of Sharqiya, Garbiya and Minya. His supporters also marched outside the Saudi embassy in Cairo in a show of support to their candidate. Meanwhile, the campaign of presidential candidate Hamdeen Sabahi has organized marches in several districts in Cairo to support his electoral program. Al-Dustur Party has organized a human chain in Al-Famaskan district in Cairo in support for Sabahi.
Through my follow-up on both presidential candidates' campaigns, I can assure that the program for al-Sisi is the most factual program that reflects the reality on the ground. He was in the government previously and knows the true problems facing this country, unlike Sabahi, who lacks vision and experience in running this country at this crucial stage.
Presidential candidate Abdel Fattah al-Sisi promised to open a social dialogue with segments of the society for the interest of the country. He ensured that education must be given a priority, noting that the infrastructure was facing major problems with more than 20,000 school buildings in bad condition. He also promised that if elected he will work to improve the living standards of all Egyptians, but asked citizens to be patient in the coming period. The presidential candidate said that he envisaged increasing the agricultural land and the land productivity as a way to achieve food security. He also said there is a number of procedures to be implemented to improve the living conditions of farmers. On the other hand, presidential candidate Hamdeen Sabahi had said that if he is elected, he would work to achieve social justice and fight corruption. He also promised to release what he called political prisoners, adding that he would amend the protest law. Sabahi said that he aims to respond to all demands of the people, vowing to carry out all pledges made in his electoral program, including combating terrorism and poverty.
The most important aspect is the ability and will for either candidate who will win to be able to implement his program on real ground. Egypt has no time to waste on trying new mechanisms that have no strong base. The preliminary results show Sisi is most likely to win. However, Egypt needs a leader who can be transparent with them and fulfill their goals, not just makes promises he can't keep.
Egypt's internal debt is estimated at about $236 billion or 85% of the gross domestic product, while the budget deficit is 13% of the GDP. The state spends nearly 30% of its budget on costly subsidies for bread and energy. External debt has risen to $45 billion as of December of last year. A key concern for Egyptians is near-daily power cuts triggered by the government's inability to buy fuel given its falling foreign reserves, raising population and low power generation.
Both candidates are facing crucial challenges in Egypt, and in case either is to win the next election and become the president of Egypt, they would have to ensure that they fulfill all the goals of the Egyptian citizens instantly. For Political Agenda, this is Yasmin Bakir reporting from Cairo, Egypt.
Thank you, Yasmin Bakir, and joining me tonight to discuss the topic furthermore from the studio, Dr. AbdelAziz Aluwaisheg, Assistant Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council for International Negotiations. From Cairo, Dr. Jamal Abdel Jawad. He is the Professor of Political Science at the American University in Cairo. Last but not the least, from Washington, D.C., joining us tonight, Dr. Ayman Wasfi, International Relations Expert. Allow me to start the program from Cairo, Egypt, with Dr. Abdel Jawad. Dr. Abdel Jawad, now so far the Foreign Ministry have announced that all the expats outside Egypt has voted in the presidential elections, and now we're waiting for the 26th and 27th of May. In your point of view, are there any complications in the elections? How the two campaigns are going for both candidates, former Field Marshal Sisi and Hamdin Sabahi, in your point of view, sir?
Well, I think in terms of campaigning and also in terms of the voting for the Egyptian abroad, I think there is no surprises so far, and things going smoothly and for a great extent as expected before. This campaign thus far has been quite peaceful. There isn't violence or instability associated with campaigning and political competition. There isn't restrictions or imposed on any of the campaigns, particularly of that of Hamdin Sabahi, and I think this is particularly very important issue, because it is not just about the election, is not just about who is going to win, but also whether the process itself will be described as credible and up to the democratic standard known in the world. There will be monitors observing the election, and they will be making a judgment at the end, and I think the judgment that they will be making is very important for the future of Egypt, for legitimating the new government and the re-establish a kind of a normal relations between Egypt and many countries who had some reservations about the developments that happened in the last summer of 2013. Regarding the voting outside I mean abroad, two observations. There is yes, high turnout, but again I think it is relatively high comparing to the earlier to the past voting in the constitutional referendum, but it is not absolutely high. It is just relatively high, so we have to be modest in evaluating the turnout outside. Secondly, there is a massive support for for Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and I think it is for a great extent reflects what is going to happen when Egyptians go to the ballot box a few days from now. And according to the past experience that we had since 2011, there has been always some sort of a lead or early indicator given by voting, external or expatriates voting for what's going to happen inside the country in terms both of the turnout and also in terms of the direction of voting. So apparently, or it's more likely now to say that Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is having a very big chance in this election.
Dr. Wasfi in Washington, D.C. sir, now in his interview, televised interview, former Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, speaking to ONTV, said that America is concerned about the stability of the region, and he mentioned a little about the Suez Canal, that if it stopped, it has a negative effect over the international trade around the world. America is very well concerned over Egypt. How do you read the American foreign policy towards Egypt nowadays, in particular during the elections?
I think America, like all countries, are interested in stability in Egypt. And of course, stability is not achieved via what we've seen in the past. If we repeat the same mistakes in the past, then it will not lead to stability. What America is seeing is that military rule will not help in stability. So that's why they were looking forward to a civilian election and a constitution that will help drive Egypt towards proper democracy. So right now, the model that we're seeing in this election pretty much follows the same pattern as the constitution referendum. So we see in the constitution referendum not such a high turnout and at the same time a big victory, but at the end, not much really changed on the ground. So I think if we look at that past recent experience, we can probably tell that not much is going to change also after this election. Right now, everyone knows that Field Marshal al-Sisi is practically, for all practical purposes, in control of the country. This just makes it more official if he wins, which right now, given the early indications from voting abroad, that's the likely scenario. But I don't think it's going to change much of what's been happening, which is ironic because I think some of the guests and the people that you interviewed mentioned that they're looking for change with Field Marshal al-Sisi, but actually I don't think that's realistic. It's been 10 months since Field Marshal al-Sisi has been in control, and he came on a platform of fighting terrorism. But even in this platform, he has not succeeded in defeating terrorism, and he has dealt with terrorism in a very traditional, archaic way, as far as using just the military solution or the
security solution,
arrests and prosecution, but not really dealing with the root cause of terrorism, which is, as we all know, is extremism, religious extremism or any kind of extremism. And to deal with that, what he would need to done is to basically open free speech, open dialogue, and allow, because extremism doesn't like darkness. It likes darkness, it doesn't like light. So if you have freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and that would help fight extremism. And I think in that sense, Sabahi might have a better chance at fighting terrorism than al-Sisi, who already proved that he did not complete the job that the platform that he came on, which is fighting terrorism. Okay.
Dr. Aluwaisheg, sir, now both candidates have their own programs. More likely, Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, as they have a stronger, as they said in the report, have stronger program. He promised that, according to plan, Egypt will feel the difference in 2 years' time. Hamdeen Sabahi came third runner-up in the last elections. when Mohamed Morsi won, Ahmed Shafiq came second, Abdel Fattah, Hamdan Sabbahi came in third with more than 3.7 million votes. Now it's between the two candidates. In your point of view, as a political observer, how do you see both candidates running their campaigns towards the Egyptian presidency?
If you don't mind, I would like to comment a little bit on what Dr. Ayman said and
Please.
then answer your question. I think there is a big difference in Egypt a year ago and today. A year ago, Egypt was gripped with violence and demonstrations and instability. I think most people, most of Egypt's neighbors, let alone its own citizens, were concerned about its future. And it was an unusual situation. And so the fact that the military stepped in, regardless of how you think of it in terms of democracy and human rights and civil rights, which Dr. Ayman, I think, is hinting at, it brought some degree of stability. The fact that the military was in the person of Field Marshal Sisi were running the show behind the scenes, as Dr. Ayman said, is probably true. But they were not formally the government. The president was Adli Mansour, and there was a government, a cabinet. Now, I think with this election, whoever wins the elections most likely will be Mr. Sisi. It will be actually ruling instead of by proxy, will be ruling in fact. So the formalities are different, and instead of being a caretaker or a power behind the scenes, the government will be upfront and will be accountable before the parliament when it's elected and before the Egyptian people. So I think there is a huge difference. There will be a huge difference after these elections. I'm not sure I agree about belittling the importance of the elections. Now the programs of the two candidates are similar in some ways, especially in the economic promises that they have made.
Both candidates
yes.
have made, yes.
And it's clear for both programs, it seems Sisi's program is much more elaborate and more well studied, while Sabahi's program is more general. But I think you can summarize them in basically three things, both of them. And as I said, Sisi's program seems to be more detailed and more and better thought out. Political, security, and economics. Political, obviously, Egypt will move from this dual power structure where there is a formal government, the president and the prime minister and a cabinet on the one hand, but there is also the military behind the scenes and in the person of Mushir Sisi or Field Marshal Sisi. So we'll move to a normal government. And so that's politically. And that should, as you remember, that's part of the roadmap, the political roadmap that was adopted last July. So that's a good thing. I think it's where you're moving more towards stability, political stability. And then on the security, I think both of them said that they would fight terrorism, and also they will not accept the presence of the Muslim Brotherhood as it is now. They probably, I think they're hinting that it could be reconstituted in a different way under a different charter. And the third issue is economics, and I think both of them have given huge promises. I'm not sure they will be able to keep them in the short run, but they're both, I think, thinking of two things in the economic area: more jobs for ordinary citizens, and fixing the budget deficit. The government finances. The government finances right now are in a shambles, despite the huge infusions of foreign aid. As your report pointed out, deficit is 13% of GDP. The normal level is 3%. So there's 10 percentage points above the danger level. Obviously that has to be fixed. In order for the government to do anything, it has to fix its own finances. It has to gain the acceptance of the international financial system, so that it can borrow money, it can deal with the international financial system. It will not be able to provide jobs or help Egyptians restore or restore the Egyptian economy and provide jobs unless it's able to finance its own operations. So both of them are, I think, are big on promises. They're very vague on what to do, they're going to do about it. Obviously, you can do it in two ways, and neither one of them is very popular, and that's why I think both candidates are not talking about those two ways. One is taxes. Nobody likes taxes. And second, borrowing. Because obviously aid...
From international funds.
Borrowing either in the private international market, I mean from banks, or borrowing from international institutions, or borrowing from neighboring countries or donors, because aid could come either in the form of loans or grants. So far, most of the GCC aid has been in the form of grants, but some of it in loans. So people don't like to hear that the government is going to borrow or it's going to raise taxes. But most likely, that's the only way that the governments, whether it's Mr. Sisi or Mr. Sabahi, will be able to fund the programs they're talking about. They're talking about huge reforms, land reforms,
Okay. Let's hear it from Dr. Jamal Abdel Jawad. I'll come back to you. Let me hear it from Dr. Abdel Jawad. Dr. Abdel Jawad, sir, now both candidates have similar programs. Both are combating terrorism. Both will be combating poverty, as they say. And Hamdeen Sabahi is looking for social justice, as he mentioned in the report. What are the differences in the two programs, in your point of view, as an Egyptian living inside Cairo? What are the two models of both candidates, sir?
There are important differences, actually, even though when it comes to details, we find similarity. Everybody wants improving standards of living. Nobody would object that. Of course, Hamdeen and Sisi will agree on that. Everybody wants to upgrade Egyptian education or the health care service provided by the people or by the government or from any other organization or source to the people, etc. Those are kind of goals that are beyond any ideological or political differences. The question is about other things. The difference is essentially in, let us say, in the overall attitude and the diagnosis of the problems of the country and how they can be dealt with. Hamdeen Sabahi is describing himself as the candidate of the revolution. So the kind of the high value that Hamdeen Sabahi appreciate and make it like the inspiring value for his own, for the entire program is revolution. Revolution is essentially about change. Revolution is essentially about instability for a great extent. Revolution is not about keeping things quiet or consolidation of something. It is rather about a radical process of transformation of society, politics, etc. This is the high value for Hamdeen Sabahi. You listen to Abdel Sisi, the highest value here is essentially about the state. And state is very much related to values of stability, of maintaining normal life, of restoring peace and order. Those are two different approaches toward and philosophies actually toward the problems the country is facing. Hamdeen Sabahi talks about social justice and addressing social inequality in the country, even though Sisi is not denying that, but he is putting more emphasis on economic growth. His argument is that if we want to address poverty in the country, we have to have resources to do that, so that we should focus at this moment on the issue of economic growth. Those are two, whether we talk about distribution of wealth or the increase and expansion of wealth. Those are two different views here, and those are there's an important difference between the two leaders here, or the two candidates. On the other hand, or in addition to that, actually this campaign is not only about programs, it's not only about platforms or ideas for the future. It is also this election is also about competence. Which of the candidates is competent enough to achieve what he is promising or what is good for the country? So when the voter is voting, or when people casting their vote in this election, they're making two judgments. One about the platform, whether they like what is said by this or that candidate, and also about their view of how competent this or that candidate is. And it is Hamdeen Sabah, essentially, his background and his credentials are essentially in political activism and opposition, and Sisi, on the other hand, background is essentially in commanding position as a leader, as administrator, considering he's like more than 40 years career in the military, the central part of the state institution in Egypt. So there are two different kind of credentials here, and I think the public judges in terms of how competent the candidate is based on those two characteristics or kinds of characteristics for the two candidates.
Dr. Wasfi, sir, now if you want to elaborate on the internal situation in Egypt, and my next question is, the European Union have announced that they might not be able to participate in the Egyptian elections because of the logistics. They did not get much of the logistics in order for them to observe the elections. In your point of view, how important for the EU to attend and supervise the Egyptian elections, and what if they could not do so?
I think it's somewhat important, but I don't think it's as important as people make it out to be. Several organizations like the Carter Institute here, they mentioned that they will not observe the elections this time around. And I think what they have seen is the repetition of the same pattern of the referendum, where even though they may not be large vote frauds like in the past, but there is a concerted effort on the part of the media and the government-supported media especially to push a certain candidate, which makes the election unfair. And then we see also the amount of space devoted to each candidate's program, and we see the full strength of the state behind Sisi. Yet we don't see real substance in the program that he is presenting. So in the same way that, for example, the claim that was made about curing all hepatitis C and AIDS and coronavirus even, and detecting them and inventing devices that do that, there's in reality real scientific basis or real substance behind any of those elements in the program. And you can measure based on that all the other claims as far as the grandiose projects that are claimed by Sisi. I think Sabahi has more his feet on the ground, and he can bring a fresh perspective. Again, I heard several times, the amount of experience, the 30-year experience that Sisi has, but we have to remember that this was 30 years of deterioration for the basic, Egyptian in terms of living standards and so on, and it led us to where we are right now. So in this instance, repeating the same mistakes of the past is not necessarily the right path. And we can see this right now in Sisi repeating the same mistakes of Morsi, for example, saying he will not be nominated, and then he nominated himself. And then basically going after like grandiose projects, but really that don't have much substance behind them, as with Morsi with the so-called Nahda, or the project that he had.
Renaissance.
And now, we need to really learn from the mistakes of the past and not repeat them.
Dr. AbdelAziz, now listening to both guests,
we know for whom each one will vote.
Exactly. That's unfortunate. In your point of view, well, this is actually, it tells us that there is real democracy when you have different opinions. But both guests have mentioned good points. Now, speaking from the side of Dr. Abdul Jawad, who says probably Abdel Fattah Sisi, the field marshal, former field marshal, has more experience in ruling as a commanding officer in the Egyptian military, but in the sense of civil leadership, Hamdin Sabbahi is kind of have stronger relations with the people of Egypt, with the base of electoral. In your point of view, why do we have those differences, and does that lead to a better democracy when we have differences between both candidates?
Definitely, I think. But first, I think I want to clarify something.
Please.
I think the European Union on Saturday said they were not going to suspend their mission in Egypt because their equipment were not allowed to was not allowed
the logistics
to
and their equipment.
Right,
exactly.
but yesterday they announced that the equipment has been released and their monitoring mission will go on as previously planned. They have at least 40 monitors in addition to experts. They will be not only in Cairo but mainly in Cairo. So the European mission is back
on track.
Back on track, and it will be a monitoring mission and not just a reporting mission. The Carter Center, on the other hand,
that's what I was
the Carter Center, on the other hand,
Americans, excuse me, sir, why the Americans, either the NGOs or the government, is against the movement in Egypt?
Right. Well, I think also just to clarify also, the Carter Center, I read their statement carefully, and they said they were not going to be monitoring the elections, but they will be sending a team of experts. So they're not boycotting
In what sense,
the whole
the
process.
team of experts?
It's a different way of monitoring, but instead of being in the field at polling stations, they will be analyzing the results and making a report about it. So it's not a total boycott from the Carter Center. President Carter did say that he's concerned about the future of democracy in Egypt. And in Egypt, among NGOs in Egypt in particular, removing Morsi would be the ultimate sin, because they have there is a fetish in America about elections, and that you cannot annul the results except through regular means. And they're not able to appreciate the extraordinary circumstances that Egypt and the region was going through. The stability of Egypt, of course, is key to the stability of the region. And it was difficult for people here, as well as it was in Egypt, to see millions of people every day marching in the streets, clashing with the police.
Exactly.
People are being killed on both sides without doing something.
And especially the number, Dr. AbdelAziz, the number that went to the streets is almost more than 30 million people, or half of the population.
So you can stick to the formality that he was elected and therefore he will stay in power indefinitely. By the way, this is the argument that Russia is making now about the Ukraine. That no matter how corrupt Yanukovych was, he's still the legitimate president. But of course the rest of the world does not accept that. And by the way, the Ukrainians are going to the polls at about the same time that the Egyptians are going. So Ukraine, just like Egypt, went through some difficult circumstances, and I think both Ukrainians and Egyptians are to be applauded for shortening the crisis and organizing another election. And I think we have to focus probably on that election, that it has to be free and fair. It has to there has to be a reasonable turnout, because even if Mr. Sisi gets 90%, it really doesn't matter if the turnout is not big enough. So for his mandate to be meaningful, there has to be a large turnout. The elections have to be clean, fair, and free. And then, of course, whoever wins has to have a clear majority.
Okay. Dr. Abdul Jawad, do you think we will have, as Dr. Aluwaisheg said, do you think that we will have clear, fair elections for the Egyptian presidency? And regarding Russia, in his interview, Field Marshal Sisi have spoken that that Russia, we are not looking at Russia as a substitute for any country, meaning the United States, and he did not mention anything about the military purchase from Russia, about military I think, equipment to be sent to Egypt. But in your point of view, is Russia going to support the Egyptian elections, and do you think that we will have a fair and clear elections in Egypt in the 26th and 27th of May?
Yeah, Russia, one of the countries who welcomed the developments that happened in Egypt in the past summer, removing Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brothers from power. We have to remember that Russia was one of the very early countries who labeled and banned the Muslim Brothers as a terrorist organization. So for them, they weren't happy at all to see the Muslim Brothers in the position of power in Egypt, and removing them, definitely this is something that made them happy about their policy and make him to welcome those developments. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, yes, definitely Egypt is going to kind of diversify its partners in the foreign policy arena in the world, with the presidency of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. I think the developments of the past 4 years made it obvious for everybody in Egypt that yes, we want to maintain strong relations with the United States, but it's the best interest of Egypt that we diversify and have more partners. The purchasing of weapons or some sort of an arms deal between Egypt and Russia, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi didn't talk about it. We have to notice this. In all the interviews Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has made, he is not addressing the public or responding to the interviewers as if he is like a candidate. He is responding as if he is a kind of a statesman or a state official, and he is saying only the things that serve a kind of a program of action that is already in place, or he see it as a kind of something that will be implemented very soon. In other words, as a candidate, it could be a good thing to boost his image, to talk about Americans, the United States denied us weapons, so we have other partners, and we were courageous enough to move towards Russia, and we obtained whatever we wanted from Russia. As a candidate, this is a good thing for him, but as a state official or as a statesman, this is a kind of a bad policy thing. Particularly, we talk about, again, we need to maintain, Egypt needs to maintain good relations with the United States, and also consolidate and enhance the relations with Russia. It is not good, and the arms deal with Russia is still a kind of an ongoing thing. It's so revealing it to the public now, I don't think this is a kind of a wise move from a statesman rather than a candidate. So we see here he runs this campaign this way. We can observe the same pattern, for instance, talking about promises. He is not making promises for anybody in terms of like increasing the salaries of government employees, or addressing a certain pressing problems in particular sectors here and there. He rather promised that we have to work, we have to enhance national wealth and accelerate economic growth so that we can meet the demand. So he's not talking hot air here, just giving promises that he doesn't have resources to substantiate. Go back to the first question, whether this election will be free and fair. I'm pretty certain that that in terms of voting, in terms of the votes that will be casted in the ballot box, I have no doubt whatsoever that this will be completely free and fair. There will not be any kind of manipulation for a number of reasons. One, the world is observing. Second, there is no need for that. I mean, if it is to be done, typically rugging votes happen when governments need to make a candidate win. But apparently Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in a stronger position, and you don't need to ruin his would-be victory by adding like a few thousand votes or so in the ballot box. That will not make any difference, actually. So perhaps, yes, I'm quite certain that this will be a fair and free election in that regard.
But I see Dr. Wasfi is shaking his head. He's not expecting, or he's not accepting what has been said. Dr. Wasfi, what is your plan, and do you agree with Dr.?
Well, I think it's more It's more about the program of Field Marshal Sisi. Again, relying on foreign aid, and several of your guests mentioned the foreign aid aspect. And it seems to be a cornerstone of Sisi's program, the foreign aid. However, that's again a mistake that Morsi made before, where he also had foreign aid as a component, a big component of his program. And that doesn't work out. I mean, Egypt's problems are very big. And relying on foreign aid without really a vision to restructure the state will not help. It's just a big money pit. So they're facing, whether it's Field Marshal Sisi or Sabahi, they are facing a number of impossibilities that require really strategic vision for the state, which neither of them seem to have articulated, especially Sisi. He seems to rely in his vision on the army model. Okay? And the army model is actually the antithesis of how to deal with those problems. The biggest problem that Egypt has is that you cannot manage 100 million people centrally. This is futile. And this is why we see the deterioration in services all over the country. Services are better in Egypt, in Cairo, because you're close to the center, but everywhere else it's very bad services, government services. And this is a byproduct of that. So we'll continue to see the deterioration in economic and also services sector because of this very heavily centralized model, which is actually a military rule or the army model. So for example, had Mr. Morsi said, you know, we're going to have elections for governors and we're going to give governors more authority to handle the problems in their governorates, then people maybe wouldn't have rebelled against him, because you have your governor, he's taking care of your governor. If you have a problem, this is the person you go to, this is the person you blame. You don't blame Mr. Morsi who appointed him. And I think Sisi is now repeating the same mistake, trying to model the whole country now after the army. It seems he thinks the army is an ideal model to run a country, which is a very antiquated and unrealistic vision. So this is one of the impossibilities that he faces. The other impossibility is that he seems to have alienated Egypt's youth. So 60% of Egypt's population is under 25 years old. And that population has not participated in the referendum and doesn't seem to be participating in this one as well, in this election. And you cannot expect to win when you're alienating and fighting the future. I mean, you may win in an election, but you will not be able to create a better future for the country.
Okay.
The other thing is that, again, that whole 30-year experience and military experience that Sisi brings. This might have been a good vision in the 1960s, but it's not a good vision for the new millennium. So if you want to build the modern state, as Egypt as a modern state, then you have to really change the whole structure of the government. And I did not see any of the candidates articulate that.
Dr. Aluwaisheg, now the country has been on a turmoil, on a hot platter for 3 years. The Egyptians need time to relax and to ease and to look for their prosperity and for progress. Do we need a free, fair elections, and do we need it soon for Egypt to stop all the problems that might face, not having a strong president, even though Adli Mansour is governing the country, but probably with less, let's say, authorities. He's not very well, he doesn't have the full authorization as the previous presidents. Do Egypt need nowadays a final, and that's it? We have to go for elections regardless of the background of both candidates, even though Hamdin Sabahi represents the normal civilians, but Egypt now seems to need the army.
Well, I think Egyptians have already decided on the elections, and it's going to take place. They're going to take place on the 26th, 27th. Already hundreds of thousands of Egyptians voted Egyptians who are living abroad. So it's already decided, and I think it's the right decision, because any government needs to have some source of legitimacy, and elections, the fact that it was voted by the people is the main source of legitimacy. That's why I was saying that earlier, that you need, for the elections to be meaningful, there has to be a large turnout. And I think risky supporters risk failing that condition by thinking that Sisi is going to win, and therefore there's no need to have a large turnout. It is important to have a large turnout, even if you know that your candidate is going to win. And I've seen the polls in Egypt, and they have gradually, Mr. Sisi gradually is getting higher and higher percentages. And if we look at the recent voting abroad as an indicator, obviously he's slated for a landslide. But I think that's not enough. As I said, elections have to be conducted in a fair manner, in a free manner, and also have to have a large turnout. Now, it is true, I think both candidates have conducted themselves as political candidates and not as statesmen yet, which is to be expected. I don't think they're talking about the difficult issues. I didn't get the impression that Mr. Sisi or Mr. Sabahi necessarily thought aid is the main part of their program. But I think realistically, Egypt will need all sources of support. It will need loans, it will need investment, it will need grants, it will need everything. But in the long run, I think, as Dr. Ayman from Washington was saying, in the long run, you need more than that. You need investment. You need Egyptians, first of all, and other outside investors to believe in the Egyptian economy, to believe in stability, and in order to come back. A couple of months ago, there was a very large investment conference in Cairo, which I took part in, and it was attended by hundreds of business people from Egypt and from the Gulf, a lot of people from Saudi Arabia. And I've talked to them informally, and they were all excited. They wanted to go back to Egypt. They wanted to invest in Egypt. I think it's the largest country in the region, the largest market, but they wanted stability. And I think that's why elections are important. It's important to put this period of instability behind us, in order because investment, economic activity needs stability, needs security. And I think for that reason, these elections, regardless whether purists think about them, they're important.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Dr. Abdul-Jawad, sir. Now, Egypt is witnessing a new wave of violence. Unfortunately, there are some threats by Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis, by the terrorist groups in Egypt. Do you think that Egypt might witness any violence in the 26th and 27th of May, or the people are so anxious to get it over with and they will stop any violence during those 2 days?
Yeah, violence from the side of the Muslim Brothers or the armed extremist groups. It is likely to happen. Their main goal is to undermine the current political system and undermine any possibilities for stability and legitimacy in Egypt. So they would do that if they can. They will use any kind of resources that they have in their disposal to achieve that. On the other hand, you have the Egyptians, the average Egyptians, the majority of Egyptians, who want the country to go on, who want to go beyond this kind of bottleneck that we are going through. And I think those will go and vote, and hopefully there will be a reasonably high turnout. Now, the comment I want to make here about the violence of this extremist groups.
In 30 seconds, please, Doctor.
Is that I don't mind much actually what kind of violence or how much violence will take place in the coming few days before and during the election. I look more for the pattern. The pattern, looking at the pattern of violence from June 30th or particularly mid-August last year until today, there is a consistent declining pattern for violence in terms of was the number of incidents of terrorist attacks, and also in terms of casualties. So it's still happening, and they will not stop.
Dr. Abdul-Jawad, I have only
undermine the political process through
Dr. Abdul-Jawad,
and violence. But the pattern, they are less capable of doing that right now than the past.
Okay, that's clear. That's clear, sir. Dr. Ayman Wasfi, in 30 seconds, because I don't want to lose you on the satellite reservation, sir. How do you see? What are your expectations? Are you optimistic in the 26th and 27th of May?
I am not optimistic that anything will change as a result of this election. The vision that Sisi presented is not a viable vision. Relying on the army model is not going to work. The army is kind of a monopoly and has its own economy in Egypt, and that will not work, as you know. So again, in order to move forward, we need to make Egypt into a modern state, and that has not been articulated by either Sisi or Sabahi. So that's why I don't see much changing after the elections, and probably more instability, just because of the same problems getting progressively worse if you don't address the structural issues with the government and have more inclusive government of the youth and more decentralization.
Okay. Dr. Ayman Wasfi, International Relations Expert from Washington, D.C. I want to thank you, sir, for joining me tonight. Dr. Jamal Abdul-Jawad, the Professor of Political Science at the American University of Cairo. I want to thank you both, gentlemen, for adding value to the program. Now, we still have the confrontation between both guests. Dr. AbdelAziz, you are the Assistant Secretary General for the Gulf Cooperation Council for International Negotiations. As an international negotiator, how do you see the situation in the coming week? And are we going to have back our Egypt?
Yes. And I think the fact that Egyptians so far have stuck to the roadmap, the constitution, now the elections, are good indicators that they will be able to restore stability to Egypt. Much will depend on what happens after the elections as well. So first, it's important to have free and fair elections, and then second, to have a large turnout, and third, once the elections are over, what is the leader of Egypt, what is the president going to do? I think that's a lot more important than what the promises they have made. And are they going to be inclusive politically? Are they going to be magnanimous against their enemies? And second, economically, are they going to be realistic? I don't agree with Dr. Ayman from Washington that there is only one model that Egypt has to follow. I think if you look around the world, you see prosperous countries, stable countries that have used different methods. China, for example, is not a democracy. The role of the military in China is very strong.
And the previous role of Turkey.
And Turkey. So I think it's important to keep an open mind and give the Egyptian government a chance to prove itself and to see whether it's going to be able to live up to its promises by restoring prosperity, stability, and political legitimacy.
Dr. AbdelAziz Aluwaisheg, Assistant Secretary General for the GCC, for the Gulf Cooperation Council for International Negotiations. Thank you, sir, for joining me tonight. Well, the viewers, here we have it. Egypt is going to vote on the 26th and 27th of May. We hope, as Arabs, as Muslims, that Egypt will overcome its obstacles, will overcome all the negatives, and will fight terrorism, fight poverty, and progress and march forward for the prosperity, not only for Egyptians, but for the Arab world and for the Muslim world. On behalf of the Executive Director of the program, Abdullah Al-Mansour, Director Abdul Jabbar Al-Kibiri, Sultan Al-Sayari, this is Hussein Al-Shamari wishing you a good night.